Now, how does all this relate to September 11? Okay? Well, it relates in a very direct way, because in every political statement by the Bush administration, 9/11 is the justification for waging these wars. It's the war on terror. And the war on terror is part of the national security doctrine. And the war on terror, the military campaign against Afghanistan, was decided on the evening of 9/11. On September 11, at 11 o'clock at night, they had decided to wage war on Afghanistan, and the justification and the pretext was that Al-Qaeda had attacked the World Trade Center. If you go through the documents and the chronology discussed in my book, where I provide a review of the meetings which were held on that evening, that decision was made. It was probably made several years before, because you don't simply improvise the war in Afghanistan from one month to the next, okay? But let's say that it was made public on September 11, or at least in the morning papers of September 12th, and the news dispatches were sent out. Mythical figure of Osama bin Laden. Everybody says Al-Qaeda is behind these terrorist attacks. And there's a lot of discussion as to whether Al-Qaeda is behind these terrorist attacks. I won't necessarily get into that. But I think what must be understood is that Al-Qaeda is not an outside enemy. Okay? Al-Qaeda is a creation of U.S. foreign policy. And is what the CIA calls an intelligence asset. The Al-Qaeda, which means the base, or the origins of Al-Qaeda, go back to the Soviet-Afghan War. It was a CIA initiative to recruit Islamic brigades, setting up the madrasas, in other words, the Quranic schools, the training camps in Afghanistan in the context of the Soviet-Afghan War. This was a Cold War initiative. It was launched under the presidency of Jimmy Carter, for which he got the Nobel Prize. Okay. Now, the Carter administration launched a secret operation. The National Security Advisor was Brzezinski, and they created Al-Qaeda. They created the Islamic Brigades. And Brzezinski doesn't actually deny it. I have an interview here. He says, yes, it was an excellent idea to do that. You know, we funded the brigades. We brought in the Wahhabi sects from Saudi Arabia, which set up the training camps, and then it was financed by drug money and so on and so forth. All this is documented. Actually, nobody, even within the CIA, will actually deny it. But the official story is he went against us. We supported Osama. We supported Al-Qaeda. It was for a worthy cause. It was during the Cold War. And in the post-war era, Al-Qaeda has turned on its sponsors. In intelligence jargon, that is called the blowback. It's when an intelligence asset goes against the sponsors, which in this case is the American intelligence apparatus. So that essentially the CIA is the ill-fated victim of this, with Osama going against us. Okay? And that is that is in a sense, it's a missing link, because the blowback says, yes, it is an outside enemy. We helped them initially. He went against us. They can't deny the historical record. But I can tell you that this is simply a big lie. And it's not so much, I mean, the lie has got to be so big. It's not the question of whether there was foreknowledge, okay, of the 9/11 attacks. It has to do with the fact that Al-Qaeda is a creature of the CIA and has remained a creature of the CIA right up until the present. And that is simply not, it's not a question again of saying yes, maybe, okay? It is something which is so well documented from official sources. Now, I'm going to read you a quote, and I would like you to guess the source of this quote, okay? It refers to the early to mid-90s in Bosnia-Herzegovina, where, as you know, Al-Qaeda was active in supporting the Bosnian Muslim army, bringing in mujahideen and weapons financed by various sources, but essentially this was part of Al-Qaeda. And the report says the following: the Clinton administration's hand-on involvement with Islamic networks' arms pipeline included inspection of missiles by U.S. government officials, the Third World Relief Agency, a Sudan-based phony humanitarian organization, was a major link in the arms pipeline to Bosnia. TWRA is believed to be connected with Osama bin Laden. There you have the Clinton administration collaborating with an organization which has links to Al-Qaeda. This document is a public document, but it was not. They decided to keep it, more or less private to themselves, because they wanted to discredit Clinton for his affair with Monica Lewinsky. Okay, and I know that there was discussion within the Republican Party to trigger an Osama Gate, a Bosnia Gate, Osama scandal, which would then backlash on the Clinton administration and accuse Clinton of collaborating with Islamic terrorists. Okay? A bit like the Iran-Contra scandal. And it was decided within the Republican Party not to pursue that particular course, because that was their course. That was the continuity of foreign policy right from the beginning. Okay? And it could backlash and it would destroy the continuity. So they preferred to go for the easy Monica Lewinsky scandal, which would denigrate and discredit the administration for something which is admittedly not as serious as collaborating with the terrorists. Okay? But I mean, we have numerous evidence. We have many points of evidence of collaboration between agencies of the U.S. government, the military and intelligence in particular, on the one hand, and the Al-Qaeda network. These do not date back to a bygone era. Now, what's the source of this document? It's the Republican Party. In other words, the Republican Party, it's a 1997 document. In 1997, the Republican Party was accusing the Clinton administration of collaborating with Al-Qaeda. They go back to 2001 or 2000, at least the last firmly documented joint military operation between Al-Qaeda and the Pentagon dates to August 2001, barely a month before the 9/11 attacks, where in the context of the civil war in Macedonia, where within the same paramilitary formation, terrorist paramilitary formation, so-called National Liberation Army. You had mujahideen sent in by Al-Qaeda with senior military officers detached by the Pentagon and who were there under a contract with military professional resources, a private mercenary company, but they were U.S. military. Okay? And they were working together. We have the photographs and we have statements by the Macedonian Prime Minister which actually accuses the United States of supporting terrorism. And there's absolutely no doubt that these things took place. And we have congressional records and so on. Okay? And in that process, and that's very important, it's outlined in the diagram, there is a long-standing historical relationship between Al-Qaeda and the Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, the ISI. Now, the ISI was essentially the go-between in the operation launched in the early 80s, first under Carter, then under Reagan. Several secret directives were issued, national security decision directives were issued under Reagan to provide support to the Islamic brigades, and it was done through Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, acting as a go-between. So that, in a sense, Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence has always acted, in a sense, as a subsidiary of the CIA. And that relationship, incidentally, was never severed. The relationship between Pakistan's ISI and the CIA has never been severed. And on the other hand, Pakistan's ISI continues to this date to support Islamic terrorist organizations in different parts of the Middle East and Southeast Asia, even in the western province of China. And they are doing this on behalf of their counterparts in the CIA. Okay, the ISI is leading these covert operations, terrorist organizations, in favor of terrorist organizations, and they're doing it while maintaining very close bilateral ties with their U.S. counterparts in Langley, namely the CIA. That background has to be understood. Now, we have reason to believe that Pakistan's ISI is part of the 9/11 conspiracy. And this is not, and at the same time, Pakistan's ISI has links to the CIA and to the Pentagon. In late September 2001, there was an FBI report to the effect that unnamed sources in Pakistan were financing the terrorists, Al-Qaeda. The relationship is documented by other sources, including the Council on Foreign Relations. But then that statement by the FBI was then later confirmed that the money transfers which were sent out of Pakistan by the ISI had been ordered by the head of the agency, General Mahmoud Ahmad. In other words, the FBI confirms that there was an undercover role whereby Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence transferred money to the ringleader of the 9/11 attacks, Mohammed Atta. This came out in the press reports, and the report itself was commented on network television. And they speak in the FBI report of the money man, the mastermind, the financiers behind the terrorists. And in a subsequent report, the name of the head of Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence is actually mentioned as him having given the order to transfer this money to the alleged terrorists of 9/11. The alleged money man was on an official visit to Washington at the time when these attacks occurred. So here you are. This is, so please understand a little bit the linkages. The FBI states, has a report which suggests that Pakistan's ISI and the head of Pakistan's ISI is the institutional architect and financier behind the terrorists. Okay? Yet the same individual which is identified in these reports, and there were several other reports, one of Indian intelligence, is on an official visit to Washington. In other words, the money man behind the terrorists, General Mahmoud Ahmad, which is head of Pakistan's inter-services intelligence, an organization which has continued to support terrorist organizations for the last 20 or 30 years, since the early 80s, is on an official visit to Washington from the 4th to the 13th of September. The Washington Post states very clearly in an editorial which came several months later, they point to the fact that this general who was met at the very senior levels of the Bush administration, meeting two individuals who are now in charge of the inquiry, Senator Bob Graham and Representative Porter Goss. Okay? And it just so happens that on the morning of 9/11, the two individuals who are now entrusted with that investigation and who have produced this 800 or 900-page report with 28 missing pages, well, these individuals were having breakfast with the money man on the morning of 9/11. The U.S. media gives us the evidence that the ISI is behind it. The Council on Foreign Relations has documented it, but they don't connect the dots to the extent that they say, how come this money man is received red carpet treatment in Washington and meets virtually everybody in the Congress and the Bush administration and so on and so forth, and then on the morning of the 12th, well, actually on two successive meetings, the 12th and the 13th, he meets Colin Powell and Richard Armitage, and he's invited into the State Department on the 13th to discuss the terms of Pakistan's cooperation in the war on terrorism. Okay? So bear in mind, you have this money man behind 9/11 is invited into Colin Powell's office, and there they discuss how the money man can help in going after terrorists. It's a bit like asking Al Capone to help in going after organized crime. It's the same procedure, but in other words, Pakistan's inter-services intelligence, which is the institution behind these terrorist organizations, is also the organization which ultimately is going to serve the interests of the US government in going after the terrorists. And the conclusion one draws, apart from all the other evidence which has accumulated, the stand-down orders, the mystery surrounding the collapse of the World Trade Towers, the collapse of WTC 7, for instance, which is shrouded in mystery, the cover-ups, and so on and so forth. All of this suggests that, first of all, that the foreknowledge issue is a red herring. Okay, it's there to mislead people, because what it does is it says, oh yes, well, there were failures, intelligence lapses, etc. The FBI didn't do its job, or the CIA we didn't know, but we didn't know when they were going to hit us, etc. Of course, they knew. Okay, intelligence assets which collaborate with the U.S. intelligence apparatus are known to their sponsors. This is not an outside enemy. It is an inside enemy, even if these groups have a certain degree of autonomy. They are instruments of U.S. foreign policy, the instruments of the U.S. military intelligence apparatus. On the 10th of September, Osama bin Laden was admitted to the military hospital in Rawalpindi, Pakistan. Now, anybody who's been to Rawalpindi knows that it's swarming with U.S. military advisors. Okay, the whole place it's the base of the Pakistani military and so on. And nobody of that stature, Osama bin Laden, would be able to enter into the hospital without some connections at the very senior levels of the military intelligence apparatus. And of course, you can always claim the reward. Okay? Now, that piece of news, of course, very, very important because it refutes all the statements made by Donald Rumsfeld, who says, well, we don't know where he is. It's like looking for a needle in a stack of hay. You've heard that several times, right? Says, well, we don't know. Maybe he's in Afghanistan. We don't know where he is. Well, this report confirms, and I think it's a reliable report because it's my favorite anchorman, Dan Rather. CBS News reporting from Rawalpindi, Pakistan. Now you see, Dan Rather again does not draw the implications of his reports. He goes to the hospital, interviews the people, sends back the images and so on. We have the transcripts of this report, and he says here, Dan Rather reporting from Rawalpindi, Osama was hospitalized on the 10th, and that was only 24 hours before the 9/11 attacks. And then but he doesn't connect the dots and say, well, Donald Rumsfeld is a big liar, okay? Because if Dan Rather says that he was there, either Dan Rather is a liar or Donald Rumsfeld is a liar. Somebody is lying, okay? But if Osama was there one day before these attacks, we could have gone in and arrested him in his hospital bed in Rawalpindi, and this would have saved a lot of time and energy and so on and so forth. But obviously that was not part of the agenda which the U.S. military intelligence establishment want to achieve. So what these incidents suggest is, in effect, that the whereabouts of Osama bin Laden, this mythical figure, are known to the intelligence community, have always been known. He could have been arrested on numerous occasions. The history suggests that Al-Qaeda is an organization which was created by the CIA, and that those links have been sustained ever since. And it makes a tremendous difference in the way we understand these events. We have to understand that the war on terrorism is fabricated. It is a complete fabrication. But at the same time, it is the doctrine which justifies all these actions, both internally and internationally. The police state inside, the militarization of the Middle East and Central Asia. On the other hand, it's part of the national security doctrine. It is a big lie. And it's perhaps the biggest lie in U.S. history, and it is absolutely essential that a consistent anti-war movement reveal the lie. We can't simply go around saying, and that's why I say the war and 9/11 have a relationship, because 9/11 is the basis which justifies the war on terrorism and this war of conquest. And you might find people, even among progressive organizations in Canada, who say, well, you know, I think I'm against the war in Iraq, but I think we should go after this guy, Osama bin Laden, okay? We have to weed out the terrorists. I think that's I support Bush on the terrorist thing, but I don't think we should invade Iraq. etc., etc. And bear in mind that throughout the propaganda campaign was to try to establish links between terrorists and their sponsors, namely the Iraqi authorities. And so that you had a very consistent propaganda campaign which was there day after day telling us that America is under threat and so on and so forth. And in the last speech of Bush in the General Assembly and his previous speech that he made a few weeks ago, he is now using a new term which is called the civilized world. Okay, we in the civilized world. So this, I think, is essential that we build this understanding, that it be part of a consistent anti-war movement. An anti-war movement cannot be based solely on anti-war rallies. We have to consistently create an organizational structure, a network which spreads across the land, of grassroots, educate our fellow citizens, spread the word, establish committees at the local level, perhaps a far less dramatic way of building an anti-war movement. And because what happens with these big rallies, they take place and then subsequently people go home, feel good that they've done something, but we need the organizational structures. We have to question the legitimacy of the main political and military actors behind this war project.